Low clarinets, selection 1. This is from the Rose 40 Studies. This is number 31. I'll read what the state has sent us as a performance guide and then add my comments at the end. This etude contains a variety of articulation patterns. Treatment of note length throughout the entire etude should be consistent, even if some tongue passages are not marked staccato, for example, measures 36 and 37. All 16th note passages should be performed like the opening phrase with staccato notes, tongued light and with separation. All 8th notes should be played short and lifted even though they do not contain staccato markings. 16th notes should stay even and consistent in pulse at all times. Do not let articulation affect the rhythmic integrity, there's a word there, of the performance. There are 2 ways to finger clarion C sharp, either the left or the right hand, left, right, depending upon the surrounding notes. Choosing the correct fingering will help students avoid sliding the right or left pinkies. We try and avoid that as much as possible. It isn't always possible to connect notes in the same hand. The analogy I use, just as an aside, is about painting yourself into a corner, which is kind of a comic strip concept, and Goofy painting the basement floor, and he's just about done, and he realizes that he's got this little space around where his feet are, and the door is over there. Got a problem. So you get into a situation that it's difficult to get out of. So we'd rather not slide if we don't have to. No, lost my place. The use of the right hand clarion B is encouraged in arpeggiated sequences to facilitate technique. The use of side fingerings for chalumeau D sharps, low register, D sharp, E flat, is a must in measure 11, 13, 14, etc. Use of side fingering for chalumeau F sharp, open G, F, F sharp, in measure 4 is encouraged rather than flipping F, F sharp. Forked low B can be used in measure 22 to more easily facilitate the jump to clarion F. That's all true. The breath marks provided in the etude are good suggestions, but breath should be moved to other locations depending on your phrasing choices. For example, many performances choose to breathe at the end of measure 9 rather than measure 10 because they feel it fits the phrase change better. Dynamic markings are limited in this etude. Students are encouraged to create musical phrases by adding crescendos and diminuendos to ascending or descending lines. Observe sudden dynamic shifts in measures 23, 24. Also take notice of the few accents that are included. Remember that although this is a technical etude, it should be played with expression, good phrasing, direction, and musicality. A few thoughts about bass clarinet. Some bass clarinet facts. If you have always been a bass clarinetist, much of this will not be new to you. If you are relatively new to the instrument, a few things to look out for. Notes around F, G, A, just above the staff, are unreliable, very squeak prone. Chippy is the word that we use. While you would not think so by looking at it, the bass clarinet is quite a fragile instrument and you should treat it carefully. Those long key rods, much longer than on the soprano clarinet, are more easily bent than shorter ones. Think back to your earlier days as clarinetists. Occasionally, you would not quite cover a tone hole, or maybe the clarinetist beside you didn't. What happened? Yeah, the most magnificent squeak. A bent key on your bass clarinet, or any size clarinet, or saxophone, for that matter, will produce the same result. And you won't fix this at home. You will only make it worse. This is where you take the instrument into Seth at Melhart's. He'll run a leak light through it, find which keys need to be bent back into place. Do not drink soda or eat candy and then play. The sugar on your breath will make the pads sticky and unresponsive. Do not ever leave the instrument, not even just a bass clarinet, but any instrument in the car. Pads will get loose and shift out of line if they don't fall out completely. And then you've got the air leak that we were talking about a moment ago. Wood instruments will be at risk of cracking if you leave them in the car. Northern climates have different problems all their own, but we are in the RGV, and we will be in the 70s and 80s in November, so it's different problems again. Always have at least 4 good reeds and have them, and only them, identified and carried with you in a protective reed guard. New reeds will often warp, so we don't trust new reeds, and generally the edges will pull away from the mouthpiece convexly. More air leak, more squeaks. You can often salvage a warped reed. There's an institution called Walmart, if you're familiar with it. Go to the hardware department, get yourself a pretty wide, flat file, which you will dedicate to reeds. And when you use it, you'll clean it out with an old toothbrush afterwards, because otherwise you're going to use up the abrasive quality. But get yourself a flat file, dedicated to reeds, and take a little off. Take a little off at a time, I should stress that, because if you take too much off, the reed becomes weak, and it's hard to put it back on, like impossible. Now, we will want the performing chair, ready chair, and all the waiting chairs to be the same height, so that bass clarinets with floor peg can be properly adjusted and therefore comfortable when your turn comes. We want the peg to be the right height, because you only get one warm-up note, and you won't have time to mess around with the peg length. So you don't want to be up like this, or fighting with the instrument because it's the wrong height. This is less of a problem for neck strap players. Set the music stand so that you can easily read the bottom of the page. This is a trap. If you don't do it, you're going to get down there and have trouble reading what's on the page. So consider how tight you'll want your neck strap so that everything is comfortable for you. Now, selection 1. We've covered the performance guide. There are frequent changes in articulation, and you want to be doing these correctly every time. So for the first 1 or 2 measures of a new articulation pattern, go over the slur or the staccato in red, big and ugly, so you can't miss it. We have a lot of right-hand Bs, and that will help you. Measures 4, 9, 10, 12, 14, 15, 16, 17, 19, 20, 22, 30, and 34. Right-hand Bs. There's also a left-hand C needed to measure 13, and a few chromatic fingerings, which will help you. If you're not familiar with those fingerings, it's still early in the process. Learn them and add them to your clarinet toolbox. As we considered earlier, it's a long blow to get from the beginning to the cadenza in measure 18. And bass clarinet is worse than soprano clarinet because every note that you blow, the tube is twice as long. If you're a soprano clarinet player who's learned bass for this audition, the tube is twice as long, and it's worse than that because the bore is larger too. And so you have to fill twice as much length and that much wider with wind to get any kind of sound at all. The musical choice, this passage from the beginning to 18, is to do it all in one breath. But if you're going to pass out, and it's a bass clarinet, and you might, compromise and do the David Height breath, which most of your competitors will.